When I came home, my bedroom no longer belonged to me. The walls were painted a soft, cheerful yellow I didn't choose. My dresser was gone. My clothes packed away like I had already left this world. And in the center of the room, a white crib, placed exactly where the loose floorboard used to be. The same floorboard my husband Frank once tapped with his cane and whispered, "If you ever feel alone, look here." I stood there gripping the doorway, realizing something cold and sharp. They hadn't just made space for a baby. They had covered something up. If this moment unsettled you even a little, I'd love to hear where you're watching from tonight and what you would have done standing in my place. Don't forget to like and subscribe if stories like this speak to you. Sometimes sharing these moments helps us feel a little less alone. I didn't step into the room right away. I just stood there, one hand still wrapped around the edge of the door frame, like if I let go, I might fall into something I couldn't climb back out of. "Isn't it beautiful?" Brittany's voice floated up behind me, light and proud, like she was showing off a magazine spread instead of my life. I turned slowly. She stood in the hallway, one hand resting over her stomach, the other brushing a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. She smiled at me, too wide, too polished. "It's very bright," I said carefully. That was the safest word I could find. Behind her, my son Eric leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He gave me a quick nod like this was a job already done, something that didn't need further discussion. "We thought it would be best," he said. "With the baby coming so soon. Best." That word echoed in my head louder than anything else. Best for who I stepped into the room, then my shoes pressing softly into the new rug they'd laid down. It was pale plush, untouched, like no one had ever lived here before, because they had made sure no one had. My eyes moved slowly across the space. The curtains were new. The bed was gone. The photographs I used to keep on my nightstand, Frank smiling in the summer sun. Sophie missing her front tooth. Eric at his college graduation gone, replaced with tiny stuffed animals and pastel-colored blankets. A stranger's life. "Where are my things?" I asked. Brittany's smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes flickered. "Oh, we packed everything up for you," she said. "It's all safe." "Safe where?" In the basement, Eric answered this time, pushing himself off the wall. "It's temporary, Mom. Don't make it a big deal." "Temporary?" That word didn't feel temporary at all. I walked further into the room, stopping near the crib. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. It felt like crossing a line I didn't agree to. "You didn't ask me," I said quietly. Eric sighed like I was the one making things difficult. "Mom, you were in rehab. You needed rest. We handled things. You handled my room." "We handled what needed to be done," Brittany added gently, her tone slipping into something softer, almost patronizing. "You can't climb stairs like you used to. This just makes more sense." I turned to her, then really looked at her. "You moved me out of my own bedroom without asking me," I said. "That's what makes sense to you." Her expression tightened just slightly, like a crack in porcelain. Eric stepped in before she could answer. "Mom, please," he said, lowering his voice like he was talking to someone fragile. "We're trying to help you. Help!" I swallowed the sharp edge rising in my throat. "Where am I sleeping?" I asked. There was a pause. Too long. Then Brittany gestured down the hallway. "We set up the sofa for you," she said. "It's actually very comfortable, and it's easier for you to get in and out of." The sofa. I let that settle. 69 years old. Widow. Homeowner, sleeping on a sofa in the house my husband and I had paid off 30 years ago. "I see," I said, but I didn't. Not really, because something didn't line up. This wasn't just about convenience, or safety, or even the baby. There was something else underneath all of it. Something I couldn't name yet, but I could feel it, like a draft through a closed window. Sophie appeared at the end of the hallway, then her backpack still slung over one shoulder. She must have just come home from school. "Grandma," she said softly. Her eyes moved from me to the room behind me, then back again. I saw the hesitation there, the uncertainty, and something else. Guilt. I smiled at her even though my chest felt tight. "Hi, sweetheart." She stepped closer slowly, like she wasn't sure where she was allowed to stand anymore. "It looks different," she said. "That's one word for it," I replied. Eric cleared his throat. "Sophie, go put your things away." She didn't move right away. Instead, she looked at me, again really looked this time, like she was trying to say something without saying it. Then she nodded quickly and disappeared down the hallway. I watched her go, and I knew. Children don't carry that kind of silence unless they've been told to, or unless they're afraid. "I'm tired," I said finally. "I'd like to sit down." Brittany brightened immediately. "Of course, let me show you. I know where the living room is," I interrupted gently. I walked past them both without waiting. Each step felt heavier than it should have. The living room looked staged. The cushions on the sofa were arranged too perfectly. A folded blanket sat at one end. A small tray with a glass of water and a bottle of pills rested on the coffee table. Prepared. Like they had expected me to accept this. Like this had always been the plan. I lowered myself onto the sofa slowly, my body still stiff from weeks of physical therapy. "This is good," Brittany said, hovering nearby. "Closer to the kitchen? No stairs." Eric nodded. "Safer." I looked up at him. "Safer for who?" I asked. He frowned. "For you, Mom." I held his gaze a second longer than he seemed comfortable with. Then I nodded. "Of course." Brittany reached for the papers on the tray. "Oh, and while we're all here," she said lightly, "there are just a few forms for you to sign. Nothing complicated, just in case of emergencies." She handed them to me like it was routine, like it was harmless. I took the papers slowly. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. But something inside me shifted. Quietly, firmly, because I had spent too many years balancing checkbooks, reading contracts, handling Frank's business accounts after he got sick. I knew paperwork, and this didn't feel like nothing complicated. I glanced down at the first page. The words were small, carefully written, deliberately buried. But I saw them. Financial authorization. Property access. Decision-making authority. I lifted my eyes back to Brittany. She was still smiling, waiting. Eric stood just behind her watching me. Not casually, not patiently, closely. Like this moment mattered more than anything else. I gave a small, tired sigh and leaned back against the sofa. "My eyes aren't what they used to be," I said. "I'll need time to go through this." Brittany's smile flickered. "Oh, it's really just standard. I said I'll need time." My voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't weak either. The room went still. Eric's jaw tightened. "For what Mom, he said. We're just trying to help you get things in order." "In order," I repeated. I placed the papers neatly back on the tray. "I've had my life in order for a long time, Eric." Silence. Thick and uncomfortable. Then Brittany let out a soft laugh, trying to smooth it over. "Of course you have," she said quickly. We're just thinking ahead. I looked at the sofa, at the neatly folded blanket, at the pills lined up like instructions, at the room that no longer felt like mine. And then slowly I looked back toward the hallway, toward my bedroom, toward the crib, toward the place where something important had been hidden, something they had covered without asking. I think I said carefully, "I'll start by getting my things back from the basement." Eric stepped forward immediately. "There's no need for that right now." I didn't ask if there was a need, I said, meeting his eyes again. For a moment, something flashed across his face. Not concern, not frustration, something sharper, something calculating. Then it was gone. Later he said, "You should rest first." Rest. That word again. It sounded less like care now, and more like control. I leaned back into the sofa and folded my hands in my lap. "Maybe I will," I said quietly, but inside I was already wide awake. Because whatever they thought they had rearranged in this house, they hadn't moved everything. And they hadn't erased me. Not yet. I waited until the house went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes naturally, but the forced kind. The kind that settles after doors close, footsteps fade, and everyone believes the night has erased whatever tension lingered in the air. I lay on the sofa with my eyes open, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, listening. Eric's bedroom door had shut an hour ago. I'd heard Brittany moving around longer drawers, opening something, being set down, water running, but eventually even that stopped. Then there was nothing, except the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock on the wall. And my thoughts. They wouldn't leave me alone. Not after what I had seen. Not after what I had read. Not after the way Eric had looked at me when I refused to sign. That look wasn't impatience. It was expectation. Slipping into something darker. I turned my head slightly and glanced toward the hallway. The nursery. My bedroom. No. Their nursery. I pushed myself up slowly, careful not to make the couch creak. My body protested, my legs still stiff, my back tight, but I ignored it. Pain was easier to manage than uncertainty. I slipped my feet into my shoes and stood there for a moment, steadying myself. Then I walked. Each step was measured. Quiet. Intentional. The hallway seemed longer at night. Shadows stretched across the floor, bending around corners, creeping along the walls, like they didn't quite belong there. I reached the nursery door and paused. My hand hovered just above the handle. I listened again. Nothing. Then I turned it. Slowly. The door opened with the faintest click. Inside the room was washed in a dim amber glow from a small nightlight shaped like a cloud. It cast soft shadows across the walls, gentle, almost comforting. But not to me. To me it felt staged, like something pretending to be peaceful. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, leaving it just slightly ajar. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and something powdery, baby lotion maybe. My eyes adjusted quickly, and there it was, the crib, still sitting in the center of the room like it had been placed there with purpose, because it had. I moved closer, my heartbeat steady but heavy. I didn't rush. I couldn't. Every inch of that space felt wrong, like I was trespassing in my own memory. I reached the edge of the crib and placed my hand lightly against the rail, cold, solid, new. Then I looked down. At the floor. The rug had been cut precisely around the legs of the crib, neatly, deliberately. And beneath it, the wood. That familiar section of wood, the one that didn't quite match the rest. I crouched, slowly lowering myself down with care. My knees protested, but I ignored it. I leaned closer. Yes, there it was, the faint seam, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look. Frank had shown me once years ago. He'd tapped it gently with his cane, then smiled at me like he was sharing a secret meant only for us. If anything ever feels off, he'd said, "Start here." I hadn't understood at the time. I thought it was one of his habits preparing for possibilities that never came. But now I understood. I reached out, running my fingertips along the edge of the board, still loose, but not accessible. Not like this. I shifted my gaze to the crib legs. They weren't just resting on the floor. They had been secured, bolted. My stomach tightened. They didn't just cover it. They made sure it stayed covered. I sat back slightly, my breath shallow now. Why would they do that? I whispered under my breath. Unless a faint sound behind me made me freeze. The floor creaked. Not from me. I turned my head slowly. The door moved just a fraction wider, and Brittany stepped in. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look angry. She just looked aware. I thought I heard something she said softly. Her voice was calm. Too calm. I straightened slightly but didn't stand. I couldn't sleep, I replied. She leaned lightly against the door frame, arms folding across her chest. Not protective, not relaxed. Measured. You shouldn't be up, she said. You could fall. I gave a small, humorless smile. I've lived in this house longer than you've known my son. Her eyes flickered at that. Just for a second. Then she stepped further into the room. Her gaze dropped to where I was sitting. To the floor. To the crib. And then back to me. You like it? She asked, nodding toward the crib. The question felt loaded. It's sturdy, I said carefully. She smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. We made sure everything was secure, she said. Secure. That word landed heavier than it should have. I shifted my hand slightly, covering the edge of the floorboard without making it obvious. Seems like you went to a lot of trouble, I said. For the baby? She replied. Of course. Always for the baby. I pushed myself up slowly, using the side of the crib for support. Brittany watched me closely. Every movement, every breath, like she was trying to read something in me. You should really rest, she said again. Doctor's orders. I met her gaze. My doctor didn't say anything about giving up my room. A flicker of irritation crossed her face this time. Barely there, but real. We're just trying to make things easier, she said. For everyone. There it was again. That phrase. For everyone. Which somehow never seemed to include me. I took a small step toward the door. She didn't move. Didn't step aside. Not right away. Then after a beat too long, she shifted just enough to let me pass. I walked by her slowly. But as I did, I felt it. That tension. That silent awareness. She knew I had noticed something. And I knew she knew. Neither of us said it. Not yet. As I reached the hallway, I paused. Just slightly. Then I turned back. Brittany, I said. She looked at me. Yes. I tilted my head toward the crib. You said you fixed a loose board. I did. How did you know it was there? For the first time that night. She hesitated. Only for a second, but it was enough. We noticed it when we were cleaning, she said. Before or after you decided to move me out. Her lips pressed together. That doesn't matter. It mattered. It mattered more than anything. but I didn't push. Not yet. I nodded slowly. "Good night," I said, and then I walked away. Back to the sofa, back to the place they had prepared for me. But something had changed now. The fear I felt earlier. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something sharper, clearer. They hadn't just rearranged my house. They had covered something. And whatever was under that floor, they were making sure I never reached it. I lowered myself back onto the sofa and pulled the blanket over my legs. My body was tired, but my mind was wide awake. Because now I knew two things for certain. First, the secret Frank left me was still there. And second, I wasn't the only one looking for it. Morning came too quickly. Or maybe I never really slept. I opened my eyes to the pale gray light filtering through the living room curtains, my neck stiff from the awkward angle of the sofa. For a moment I didn't move. I just listened. Cabinets opening, dishes clinking, the low murmur of Brittany's voice. Normal sounds, domestic sounds, the kind that used to belong to me. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up slowly, every joint reminding me I was no longer young. But the ache in my body felt distant compared to the tightness in my chest. Last night hadn't been a dream. The crib, the bolted floor, Brittany's hesitation. It was all real, and now I needed to be careful. I stood smoothing down my sweater as I made my way toward the kitchen. Brittany stood at the counter slicing fruit with practiced ease. She turned as I entered, her expression immediately softening into that same polished smile. "Good morning," she said brightly. "How did you sleep like a guest?" I replied. She paused just briefly before setting the knife down. "Well, hopefully not for long," she said. "We'll get you settled properly." "Settled?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. Eric walked in a moment later, already dressed, his phone in his hand. He barely looked up. "Morning, Mom. Eric." He poured himself coffee, scrolling through something on his screen. The silence stretched between us, filled only by the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then Brittany turned, wiping her hands on a towel. "Actually, this might be a good time," she said lightly. "Since we're all here." My stomach tightened. She walked over to the small tray on the table, the same one from last night, and picked up the stack of papers. "I know you said you wanted time," she continued, "but these really are simple. Just to make sure we can help if anything happens." She placed them in front of me again. Carefully, deliberately. Eric finally looked up then. "Mom." "It's standard stuff," he said. "Everyone does it." I sat down slowly, pulling the papers closer. This time I didn't pretend. I read, line by line, carefully. "Durable power of attorney," I murmured. "Financial access, authority over property decisions." I looked up. "That's not simple, Brittany." Her smile tightened. "It's just precautionary," she insisted. "After your surgery, we thought..." "You thought I might not be able to manage my own life anymore." Eric sighed, setting his coffee down harder than necessary. "That's not what we're saying. It's exactly what you're saying." The words came out quieter than I expected, but sharper. Eric ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, you were in rehab for 6 weeks. You needed help." "You still do. I needed help recovering," I corrected. "Not handing over my home." The room fell silent. Brittany shifted her weight slightly, her hand resting protectively over her stomach again. "We're not trying to take anything from you," she said, her voice softer now. "We're trying to protect you." "And the baby." There it was again, The baby. Always the baby, as if that alone justified everything. I lowered my gaze back to the papers. Then slowly I turned one of the pages toward them. This section, I said, tapping the line with my finger. It gives full authority over any real estate decisions, including the sale of this house. Neither of them spoke. That silence told me more than any explanation could. So I continued lifting my eyes. Tell me again how this is just about my health. Eric's jaw tightened. You're twisting it, he said. No, I replied calmly. I'm reading it. Brittany stepped in quickly. We're just planning ahead, she said. In case something happens and we need to act quickly, you mean in case I say no? Her expression flickered. There it was, just for a second. Then she recovered. Mattie, she said gently, we're your family. Family. I let that word sit between us. Heavy. Complicated. Then why wasn't I included in the decision to move me out of my own room? I asked. Eric exhaled sharply. Because you weren't here. I was alive, Eric. That stopped him. For a moment. But only for a moment. He leaned forward, his voice lowering. Mom, we don't have time to argue about this, he said. The baby is coming. We need stability. Stability. Another word that sounded reasonable. Until you looked closer. And your version of stability, I said slowly, is me signing away control of everything I own. That's not fair, Brittany said quickly. What's not fair, I replied, is being treated like I've already lost my mind. Sophie appeared in the doorway then. She must have heard the raised voices. Her eyes moved between us, wide and uncertain. Is everything okay? She asked softly. No one answered right away. Then Brittany forced a smile. Of course, she said. We're just talking. Sophie didn't look convinced. Her gaze shifted to the papers in front of me, then back to my face. I saw it again. That same tension. That same unspoken warning. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back on the tray. I'm not signing anything I said. Eric's expression hardened. Mom? I said no. The firmness in my voice surprised even me, but I didn't take it back. Brittany let out a quiet breath like she was trying to stay composed. Okay, she said slowly. That's your choice. It didn't sound like acceptance. It sounded like a pause. A recalculation. Eric picked up his coffee again, but his hand was tight around the mug. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he muttered. Maybe I said. Or maybe I was finally seeing it clearly. I pushed my chair back and stood. I'm going to get my things from the basement. Eric stepped forward immediately. Mom? There's no reason to. There is for me. I met his eyes. Held them. This time he didn't look away, but something in his expression shifted. Again. That same thing I had seen last night. Not concern, not frustration, something colder, something calculating. You should rest, he said again. I'll rest later. Brittany spoke up quickly. I can bring some things up for you, she offered. You don't need to go down there yourself. I'd rather see it myself. Another silence. Another pause. Then Eric nodded once. Short. Sharp. Fine, he said. Later. Later. That word again. Everything important kept getting pushed to later. I gave a small nod. Later then. But inside, I had already made a decision. There wouldn't be a later. Not the kind they wanted. Because every minute I waited, They were watching, planning, adjusting, and whatever was hidden beneath that floor, whatever Frank had left for me, it was the one thing they couldn't afford for me to find. I turned and walked back toward the living room. But before I reached the sofa, I felt it again. That quiet presence behind me. I glanced over my shoulder. Sophie stood in the hallway, half hidden, her fingers gripping the edge of the wall. She looked at me. Really looked. Then, almost too quickly to notice, she shook her head. Just once. A warning. My heart skipped. Because now I understood something else. This wasn't just about papers, or the house, or even the crib. There was a timeline, and whatever they were planning, it was already in motion. I didn't go to the basement that morning, not because I had changed my mind, but because Sophie's warning lingered in my chest like a second heartbeat. Not yet. That was what her eyes had said, what that small shake of her head had meant. So I waited. I sat on the sofa with a book open in my lap, turning pages I didn't read, listening to the rhythm of the house instead, every footstep, every door, every whispered conversation that stopped when I got too close. By late afternoon, Eric left. I heard his car pull out of the driveway, the engine fading into the distance. A few minutes later, Brittany called out from the hallway, her voice light and distracted. "I have an appointment. I'll be back in a couple of hours." The front door closed. Silence settled in. Real silence this time. I didn't move right away. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. Then I closed the book, set it aside, and stood. My body felt steadier than it had that morning. Or maybe my mind had simply decided it didn't care about the weakness anymore. I walked down the hallway, slowly pausing when I reached Sophie's room. The door was slightly open. She was sitting on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, her phone forgotten beside her. She looked up the moment she sensed me. "Are they gone?" she asked quietly. "Yes." She exhaled tension, leaving her shoulders all at once. "Okay," she said, sliding off the bed. "Then we don't have much time." That confirmed it. There was a timeline. I stepped into the room, closing the door behind me. "Sophie," I said gently, "you need to tell me what's going on." She hesitated. Her fingers twisted together in front of her, her eyes darting briefly toward the hallway. Then she nodded. "They've been planning things," she said. "For a while." "What things?" She swallowed. "Dad said once you signed the papers, everything would be easier, that the house would finally be in the right hands." The words hit me harder than I expected. "The right hands," I repeated. Sophie nodded. "And Brittany, she's been talking to that woman, Denise Carter. A lot. They come here when you weren't around. They walked through the house, took pictures." My chest tightened. "They're getting ready to sell it," I said. Sophie nodded again. I heard her say they already have someone interested. Like, ready. Ready. Of course they were. "Why the nursery?" I asked. "Why do it now?" Sophie's face shifted, something like unease flickering across it. "Because of the floor," she said. I went still. "What do you mean?" She hesitated again, then spoke more quickly, like she needed to get it out before she lost her nerve. "A few weeks ago, when you were still gone, Dad was in your room. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I heard him. He was talking to Brittany." My heart began to pound. "What did he say?" Sophie looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said, 'It has to be here. Dad wouldn't have trusted anyone else with it.'" A cold wave moved through me. "Frank." He knew I murmured. Sophie nodded. "They pulled up part of the rug," she continued. "And Dad found the loose board. He tried to open it, but—" I think he couldn't get it all the way up. My breath caught. He didn't find the box I said. No, Sophie said. But after that, everything changed. How? They stopped talking about waiting, she said. Brittany said they needed to lock it down. That if you came back before they figured it out, it would be harder. Lock it down. My eyes flashed to the nursery in my mind. The crib, bolted to the floor. They covered it, I said. Sophie nodded. And they rushed the nursery, even though the baby isn't due for weeks. That explained everything. The timing, the urgency, the way they had acted like my absence was permanent. They weren't making space for a baby, I said slowly. They were sealing something away. Sophie looked at me, her eyes wide. I think they're still trying to figure out how to get under it, she said, but they didn't want you to know it was there. I let out a long breath. Frank, what did you leave for me? And why were they so desperate to get it first? Sophie stepped closer. We have to move the crib, she said. Now, before they come back. I looked at her. At this child, no, not a child anymore. Not after what she had been carrying alone. You're sure I asked? She nodded firmly. They won't be back for at least an hour, she said. Brittany's appointment always takes a long time. And Dad's at work. An hour. It would have to be enough. I nodded. All right, I said. Let's do it. We moved quickly, but carefully. The nursery felt different in daylight. Less like a dream, more like a lie. Sophie went straight to the crib, dropping to her knees beside one of the legs. There are screws here, she said, running her fingers along the base. Dad tightened them. I knelt beside her, my joints protesting, but my focus steady. Can you get them loose? She nodded. I think so. She disappeared for a moment, returning with a small toolkit from the hallway closet. I saw where he put it, she said. Of course she had. She had been watching everything, listening, learning, while I was gone, while I was recovering, while they were planning. She worked quickly, unscrewing the bolts one by one. Each turn felt louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet house. I kept my eyes on the door, listening, waiting. Every second stretched. Every sound outside made my heart jump. Hurry, I whispered. I'm trying, she whispered back. Finally, the last screw came loose. We both froze for a second. Then together we gripped the crib. Ready? Sophie asked. I nodded. 1, 2, 3. We lifted. It was heavier than it looked, but we managed to shift it just enough to expose the section of floor beneath. The rug had been cut neatly around it, just like I had noticed the night before. Sophie pulled the edge back, and there it was. The board. The same one Frank had shown me. The same one Eric had tried and failed to open. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for it. This was it. Whatever Frank had left, whatever Eric had been searching for, whatever Brittany had tried to bury under pastel paint and nursery decorations. Sophie, I said quietly, stand by the door. She nodded immediately, moving into position, her eyes fixed on the hallway. I slid my fingers under the edge of the board. For a moment it didn't move. Then a soft shift. A quiet release, and the board lifted. A breath caught in my throat. Because beneath it, there was something there. Still hidden, still untouched, still waiting. And for the first time since I walked back into this house, I knew. Whatever truth had been buried here, it hadn't been erased. Not yet. The board came up with a soft, reluctant groan, like the house itself was remembering something it had been asked to forget. For a moment, neither of us moved. I just stared into the dark space beneath the floor, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. A small metal box. Dull. Scratched. Familiar. Exactly where Frank had left it. My fingers trembled as I reached down, brushing away a thin layer of dust. The air inside the hollow smelled dry and stale, untouched for years. "Sophie," I whispered. "I see it," she whispered back from the doorway, her voice tight. "Hurry." I didn't need to be told twice. I slid the box out slowly, careful not to scrape it against the edges. It felt heavier than it looked solid, deliberate, like it had been made to last, like whatever was inside mattered. I set it gently on the floor beside me, my hands resting on top of it for a second, as if I needed permission to open it. "Frank, what did you leave for me, and why did you hide it from your own son?" "Sophie locked the door," I said quietly. She nodded and moved quickly, turning the lock with a soft click before returning to her post. My heart pounded louder now. Not from fear, from certainty. This was it. The truth Eric and Brittany had been circling. The reason they had taken my room. The reason they had tried to make me sign those papers. I lifted the lid. Inside, everything was neatly arranged. Frank had always been like that, methodical, careful, precise, even with secrets. On top lay a folded envelope, my name written in his unmistakable handwriting. Mattie. My vision blurred for just a moment. I swallowed hard and picked it up. The paper was worn at the edges, but the ink was still dark. I opened it slowly and began to read. Mattie. If you're reading this, then something has already gone wrong. I had hoped you would never need to find this, but I know you don't ignore the feeling when something isn't right. I'm sorry I didn't tell you everything while I was still here. I thought I could handle it myself. I thought I could protect you without breaking your heart. I was wrong. My hands tightened slightly around the paper. I kept reading. Eric is in trouble. Not the kind he admits to. The kind he hides. He's been taking money, quietly, small amounts at first, then more. From accounts he thought I wouldn't check. From places he believed I trusted him not to touch. I confronted him. He denied it. Then he blamed circumstances. Then he asked for forgiveness. I wanted to believe him, but I've seen that look in his eyes before. It's not desperation, it's entitlement. My chest tightened painfully. No, not Eric, not my son. But the words didn't feel like suspicion. They felt like truth Frank had carried alone. I began preparing for the possibility that he wouldn't stop, that he might come for more, that one day he might even come for you. I stopped reading for a moment. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Sophie shifted behind me. "What does it say?" she whispered. I couldn't answer yet, because I wasn't ready to say it out loud. I went back to the letter. The house is not as simple as it appears anymore. I created a trust. Quietly. Legally. Everything is still yours. Mattie always yours while you're alive. No one can take that from you unless you give it to them. But after, it does not automatically go to Eric. I couldn't risk it. My breath caught. The house. The thing they were trying to control. Instead, it will be protected. Managed through the trust. Portions will go to charity causes we both believed in. And there is one exception. If Sophie grows into the kind of person who chooses honesty over convenience, who protects rather than takes, then she will have a place in this future, not as entitlement, as trust earned. My eyes filled. Sophie. Frank had seen something in her, something Eric had lost. There are documents here, evidence, things Eric cannot explain away. If he has changed, if he has truly become better, you may never need to use them. But if he hasn't, then you will know what to do. The letter ended there. Simple. Direct. Like Frank always was. I lowered it slowly, my hands no longer trembling, but something inside me was. Not fear, grief, and something colder. Understanding. Sophie, I said softly. She stepped closer. What is it? I looked up at her, at the girl who had stood watch for me, who had warned me, who had chosen truth. Your grandfather left this for us, I said. For us, I nodded. Then I reached back into the box. Beneath the letter were several folders. I opened the first one. Bank statements, highlighted entries, transfers, withdrawals, amounts that started small and grew. My stomach turned. This is real, I whispered. Sophie leaned closer, her face pale. That's Dad's name, she said quietly. I know. I moved to the next folder. Legal documents. The trust Frank had mentioned. Signed. Dated. Official. Irrefutable. And then a small USB drive. Black. Unmarked. I picked it up, turning it between my fingers. What's that? Sophie asked. I don't know, I said, but I had a feeling. Frank didn't leave things unfinished. If the documents were proof on paper, then this was something more, something Eric couldn't deny. A sound outside made us both freeze. A car door, slamming. My heart jumped into my throat. They're back, Sophie whispered. Too soon. Far too soon. Put it back, she said urgently. We don't have time. No. The word came out sharper than I expected. I looked at the box, at the letter, at everything Frank had trusted me to find. If we put it back, they'll keep trying, I said. They'll never stop. But if they see it's gone, they'll know anyway, I said quietly. I closed the box quickly, gripping it tight. Help me move the crib back, I added. We worked fast, faster than before. The screws weren't tightened all the way, just enough to make it look secure. The rug was pulled back into place. The board number. The board stayed open. I couldn't risk sealing it again. Not after this. Not after knowing. Footsteps approached the front door. Voices. Eric. Brittany. Closer now. Sophie grabbed my arm. Go, she whispered. I'll stall them. I hesitated. Just for a second. Then I nodded and slipped out of the room, the metal box held tight against my chest. Because now, everything had changed. The house, the truth, my son. And whatever they thought they were about to take from me, they had no idea. I already had it. I didn't stop until I reached the bathroom at the end of the hall. It was the only room in the house that still felt untouched. No pastel paint, no rearranged furniture, no careful staging, just tile, a mirror, a door I could lock. I slipped inside and turned the lock with a quiet click, pressing my back against the door as I tried to steady my breathing. The metal box felt heavy in my arms, heavier than it had a moment ago, because now I knew what it carried, not just documents, not just proof, but the truth about my son. I closed my eyes briefly. Eric. I pictured him as a boy, mud on his shoes, laughter too loud for the house, always running ahead of me, never looking back to see if I could keep up. That boy felt so far away now, replaced by someone I didn't fully recognize, someone Frank had seen more clearly than I ever had. A knock sounded faintly down the hall. Mom Eric's voice. I opened my eyes. He was home. I moved quickly, setting the box on the edge of the sink. My hands moved almost on instinct now, opening it again, scanning its contents with sharper focus. I needed to know exactly what I was holding, because whatever came next, I wouldn't have time to second-guess myself. I pulled out the bank statements again, flipping through them faster this time. Dates, amounts, patterns, transfers made late at night, withdrawals just under reporting thresholds, accounts I barely remembered opening, accounts Frank had clearly been monitoring closely. Eric hadn't just made a mistake. He had built a system, a careful, quiet system of taking. My stomach tightened. Another knock. Closer this time. Mom. You okay? I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I reached for the USB drive again. If there was anything that could confirm what I was seeing, it would be on that. I scanned the room quickly. No computer. Of course not. They had thought of that. They had stripped away access, control. But they hadn't counted on everything. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out my phone. Old, but not useless. I stared at the USB drive, then at the phone. Different ports, different worlds, but there was something else in the box. I went back through it, my fingers moving faster now. And there, a small adapter, tucked beneath the folders. Frank, always thinking ahead. I let out a quiet breath and connected it, my hands steady now despite the storm inside me. The phone recognized it immediately. A single file. Audio. Dated 2 weeks before Frank died. My heart began to pound again. This was it. Sophie Brittany's voice echoed faintly from the hallway. Have you seen your grandmother? Sophie answered too quickly. She's in the bathroom, I think. Good girl. I pressed play. At first there was only static. Then, Frank's voice. Stronger than I expected. Clear. Deliberate. I need you to understand something, Eric, he said. My breath caught. Then Eric's voice came through. Tense. Defensive. I told you I was going to pay it back. This isn't about paying it back, Frank replied. It's about trust. You crossed a line. Silence. Then Eric again. You're overreacting. No, Frank said calmly. I'm finally reacting the way I should have years ago. My hand tightened around the edge of the sink. Years. This had been going on for years. You think hiding money is a small thing, Frank continued. You think taking from your own family is something I can ignore. I didn't take it, Eric snapped. I borrowed it. You didn't ask. I didn't have to. It was just sitting there. The words cut off abruptly, but the meaning didn't. It was just sitting there, like it belonged to him, like everything did. I felt something inside me shift, not breaking, hardening. Frank's voice softened then, but not with weakness, with certainty. If you keep going like this, he said, you'll lose more than money, Eric. A bitter laugh from my son. Like what? This house. You think I care about the house? No, Frank said quietly. I think you care about control. Silence again. Longer this time. He had seen it. All of it. Long before I had. You don't trust me, Eric said finally. No, Frank replied. Just that. No hesitation. No softness. Just truth. Another knock on the bathroom door. Mom Eric again. Louder now. Closer. I froze. The recording continued, but I lowered the volume instinctively. "I'm your son," Eric said in the audio, his voice sharper now. "And I'm your father," Frank answered. "Which is why I'm telling you this before it's too late." A pause. "Then I've changed things," Frank said. My breath caught. "You won't be able to access everything the way you think you can. Not anymore." "What does that mean?" Eric demanded. "It means your mother will be protected," Frank said. "Even from you." The words hit me like a physical force. "Even from you." A loud knock on the door jolted me back to the present. Mom opened the door. Eric's voice wasn't patient anymore. It wasn't concerned. It was controlled. Tight. I shut off the recording quickly and disconnected the USB, slipping it back into the box. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing, thinking. Because now I knew everything I needed to know. Frank hadn't just suspected. He had known. He had prepared. And he had trusted me to finish what he couldn't. Another knock. Harder. Mom. I lifted my head and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I looked older. Of course I did. But something else had changed. The uncertainty, the hesitation. It was gone. Replaced by something quieter, stronger. Resolve. "I'm coming," I said. My voice was steady. I closed the box and tucked it under my arm, covering it with my cardigan as best I could. Then I unlocked the door and opened it. Eric stood there, his expression carefully neutral. But his eyes went straight to my hands, to what I was holding. Too fast, too focused. He knew. Not exactly what I had, but that I had something. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, just needed a moment. His gaze lingered, searching, calculating. Then he stepped aside. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. Like nothing had changed, like everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. I walked past him slowly, feeling his eyes on my back. And for the first time since I had come home, I wasn't the one in the dark. Because now I knew the truth. About the house. About the documents. About the plan. And most of all, about my son. I didn't bring the box to dinner. That would have been too obvious. Too confrontational. And I wasn't ready for that, not yet. Instead, I slipped it into the back of the linen closet in the hallway behind a stack of old blankets no one ever used. It wasn't the safest hiding place, but it would have to do for now, because the truth needed timing, and I wasn't going to rush into a fight I hadn't fully prepared for. Mom Brittany called from the kitchen. "We're starting?" I smoothed down my cardigan, forcing my face into something neutral, and walked in. The table was already set. Too neatly, too carefully. Plates aligned, glasses polished, napkins folded like we were expecting guests. But it was just the four of us. Me, Eric, Brittany, Sophie, and the silence sitting between us. I took my seat, slowly aware of how Eric watched me, not openly, but enough. Brittany smiled as she placed a dish in the center of the table. "I made something light," she said. "Easy on your stomach." I nodded. "Thank you." We began to eat. At first, no one spoke. Just the sound of forks against plates. The quiet choreography of people pretending nothing was wrong. But beneath it, everything was wrong. I could feel it in the way Eric avoided my eyes. In the way Brittany kept glancing at him, in the way Sophie barely touched her food. Finally, Brittany broke the silence. "I was thinking," she said lightly, "we should start making some long-term plans." I didn't look up. "What kind of plans?" She exchanged a quick glance with Eric, then smiled again. "For the house," she said. For the baby. For everyone. There it was. Again. Everyone. I set my fork down carefully. I've lived here for 42 years, I said. I've made quite a few plans already. Eric leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. Times change, Mom. So do people, I replied. The words hung in the air longer than I intended. Brittany jumped in quickly. No one is trying to take anything away from you, she said. We just want to make things easier. By putting me on the sofa, I asked. Her smile faltered. That's temporary. Like the papers. Silence. Eric's jaw tightened. You're still on that, he said. I never left it. He exhaled sharply. Mom, you're making this into something it's not. I lifted my gaze then, met his eyes. I read the documents, Eric. That was enough. Something shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough. Brittany's fingers tightened around her fork. Eric's posture changed just slightly but noticeably. What exactly do you think you read? He asked. I held his gaze. Enough. The word was quiet, but it landed. Sophie looked between us, her breath shallow. No one moved. No one spoke. Then Brittany forced a small laugh. I think we're all just tired, she said. This has been a big adjustment for everyone. Adjustment. I almost smiled, because that word felt like a cover for something far less gentle. I agree, I said calmly. It has been an adjustment. Eric leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. Then let's not make it harder than it needs to be. There it was again. That tone, that pressure. Soft on the surface, hard underneath. I picked up my glass of water, taking a small sip before answering. Sometimes things are harder because they're not right, I said. His eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means, I replied evenly, that I won't be rushed into decisions about my life. Brittany set her fork down. Mattie. No. I said gently but firmly. You've both said enough. Now it's my turn. The room went still. Even Sophie stopped breathing for a moment. I understand you're expecting a baby, I continued. I understand you want space, stability, comfort. I paused. But none of that gives you the right to move me out of my room, pack my life into boxes, and put papers in front of me like I don't know what they mean. Eric's face hardened. We're your family. Yes, I said. You are. And that was what made it worse. The silence stretched again, longer this time, heavier. Then Eric pushed his chair back slightly. What do you want, Mom? He asked. The question sounded simple, but it wasn't. Not anymore. I looked at him, really looked, at the man he had become, at the distance between us that I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. I want respect, I said. The word felt both small and enormous at the same time. I want to be part of decisions that affect my life, I added, and I want honesty. Brittany shifted uncomfortably. You're implying we've been dishonest. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence speak first. Then I said, I'm saying I deserve the truth. Eric's expression darkened. And what truth is that? The question came out sharper than he intended. Or maybe exactly as sharp as he meant it. I held his gaze. About the house, I said. There. I had said it. Not everything, but enough. His reaction was immediate, a flicker, quick, but unmistakable. He recovered just as fast. What about it? He asked. Too casually. Too quickly. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Just that it matters, I said. More than you've been letting on. Brittany looked between us, tension rising in her shoulders. I think we're going in circles, she said. This isn't productive. No, it wasn't productive. It was revealing. Sophie finally spoke, her voice small but steady. Maybe we should just take a break. All three of us turned toward her. She looked down at her plate. I mean, everyone's upset. No one argued because she was right, but not in the way she thought. I picked up my fork again, taking a small bite even though I wasn't hungry. We can talk later, I said. Eric studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. Yeah, he said. Later. That word again. Later, but now it sounded different, not like delay, like a warning. Dinner ended quietly after that. No laughter, no conversation, just the sound of chairs moving and dishes being cleared. As I stood, Brittany reached for the plates quickly. I've got it, she said. Of course she did. Control. Always control. I stepped away from the table, moving slowly toward the hallway, but before I reached it, I felt it. That same sensation. Eyes on me. Watching. Measuring. I turned my head slightly. Eric stood near the kitchen counter, his phone in his hand, but he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at me. And this time, he wasn't hiding it. There was something different in his expression now. Something sharper, more focused. Like he had stopped pretending. Like he had realized something had shifted. Because it had. He knew I wasn't the same person who had walked into that nursery, and I knew he understood that. We held each other's gaze for a second longer, then I turned and walked away, back down the hallway, past the nursery, past the place where everything had changed. And as I passed the linen closet, I felt it again, that quiet certainty. The truth wasn't buried anymore. It was here, in this house, between us, waiting. And whatever happened next, it wouldn't be hidden. Not for long. The next morning, Brittany woke up earlier than usual. I knew because I heard her before the sun fully came up, drawers opening, cabinet doors closing, just a little too carefully, the soft shuffle of footsteps that weren't meant to be noticed. I didn't open my eyes right away. I just listened. There was a difference in the air, subtle, but unmistakable. They were adjusting. After dinner, after my refusal, after the way I had said no without raising my voice, something had shifted, and now they were moving differently, more cautious, more deliberate. I opened my eyes, slowly staring up at the ceiling. Then I turned my head slightly. From where I lay on the sofa, I could see the edge of the hallway, the linen closet door, still closed, still quiet, but no longer just a closet. Now it held everything. The truth, the proof, the line they couldn't cross unless I let them. I sat up slowly, my body stiff but my mind sharp. By the time I reached the kitchen, Brittany was already dressed. Her hair neatly pulled back, her makeup done in that effortless way that always felt just a little too perfect. She looked up when she saw me. "Oh, good morning," she said, a touch of surprise in her voice. "You're up early?" I replied. She smiled, but it didn't quite settle. "Doctor's appointment," she said. "Routine." "Routine?" I nodded. "Of course." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then turned back to the counter. "I was thinking," she added casually, "maybe after today we can revisit those papers, just to get everything organized before the baby comes." There it was again, persistent, careful, not pushing too hard but not letting go. I poured myself a cup of coffee, taking my time before answering. "We've already talked about that," I said. Her back stiffened slightly. "I know," she said. "I just don't want things to get complicated later. They already are." Silence. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she picked up her purse and keys. "I'll be back in a few hours," she said, turning toward the door. Then she paused, just for a moment, and glanced not at me, but toward the hallway, toward the linen closet. My chest tightened. She was checking, not opening it. Not yet, but checking. I pretended not to notice. She left. The front door clicked shut behind her. A few seconds later, Eric's bedroom door opened. He stepped out already dressed, his phone pressed to his ear. "No, we're close," he was saying. "I just need a little more time." He stopped when he saw me. His expression changed instantly. The edge disappeared, replaced by something neutral. "Hey," he said, ending the call. "Morning." "Morning." He studied me for a moment, then walked into the kitchen grabbing a mug. "You sleep okay?" he asked. "Enough." He nodded, pouring himself coffee. We stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then he spoke again. "You know we don't have to fight about this." I leaned lightly against the counter. "I'm not fighting." He let out a short breath. "Then what do you call it?" I looked at him, standing still. He frowned slightly. "That doesn't make any sense." "It does," I said. "You're the one trying to move everything." His grip tightened around the mug. "For a reason." "So you keep saying." He hesitated, then set the mug down. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "This house is too much for you now. You can't manage it alone." I tilted my head slightly. "I've managed it longer than you've lived in it. That was before." "Before what? Before?" He stopped. "Before you got older. Before you got weaker. Before you became inconvenient." He didn't say it, but it hung there anyway. I nodded slowly. "I see." He ran a hand through his hair again. "I'm just trying to make sure you're taken care of." I held his gaze. "And who takes care of you?" The question caught him off guard. "What if everything is about taking care of someone?" I said calmly then. "Who's taking care of you, Eric?" His eyes narrowed. "I don't need taking care of." "No," I said softly. "You need control." The words landed harder than anything I'd said before. For a moment he didn't move, didn't speak. Then, "You don't know what you're talking about." His voice was quieter now, but sharper. I didn't respond, because I did know. I knew more than he thought, more than he wanted me to. He picked up his mug again, taking a long sip, then set it down harder than before. "I've got a meeting," he said abruptly. "We'll talk later." Later. Always later. He walked past me without another word, but as he reached the hallway, he slowed, just slightly. His eyes flicked toward the linen closet, then back to me. There it was. Confirmation. He was thinking about it, wondering, measuring. I gave nothing away, just watched him. He left a minute later. The front door closed, and the house fell quiet again. But this time, the quiet felt different, charged, like something was about to happen. I waited. 10 minutes. 15. Then I moved. Straight to Sophie's room. She was already up, sitting at her desk pretending to do homework, but her eyes lifted the second I walked in. "Are they gone?" she asked. "Yes," she exhaled. "Okay." I closed the door behind me. They're getting nervous, I said. I know, she replied. Dad was up late last night, talking to Brittany. About what? She hesitated. About you, she said. About how you're not cooperating. I almost smiled. That sounds like me. She didn't smile back. He said if you don't sign soon, they might have to do something else. The words settled heavily. What kind of something else, I asked. She shook her head. I don't know, but it didn't sound good. I nodded slowly. Of course it didn't, because this was never just about convenience, or safety, or even the baby. This was about something they thought they deserved, something they believed was already theirs. We don't have much time, Sophie said quietly. I met her eyes. I know. Then I turned slightly, looking toward the hallway, toward the closet, toward the truth waiting inside it. They're going to push harder, I said. Sophie swallowed. What do we do? I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Frank's letter, the recording, the documents, the lies. We get ahead of them, I said. How I looked back at her, by making sure they can't pretend anymore. Her eyes widened slightly. You mean, yes. I straightened, my body still tired, my heart still heavy, but my mind clear, focused, ready. Tonight, I said. We stop this. Sophie nodded, and for the first time since I came home, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning, because whatever Eric thought he was building, he wasn't the only one thinking ahead. I didn't spend the day resting. I spent it preparing. Not in a way anyone would notice, no rushing, no sudden movements, no obvious signs of urgency. I moved slowly, deliberately, like the same quiet woman they thought they could manage. But inside, everything was shifting into place. By noon, I had already made one call, then another. Careful, brief, precise. The kind of calls Frank used to make when something mattered. Sophie stayed close, drifting in and out of rooms like she belonged to the house again, not hiding but not drawing attention either. Every time our eyes met, there was a shared understanding now. Tonight. Everything would change tonight. Grandma, she said softly as she stepped into the living room where I sat with a folded newspaper in my lap. Yes, sweetheart. What if they don't react the way we expect? I looked up at her. That's always a possibility, I said. Her brow furrowed. What if Dad just denies everything I held her gaze? He will. That wasn't a guess. That was certainty. Sophie swallowed. Then how do we prove it? I reached for my teacup, taking a slow sip before answering. We don't argue with people who lie, I said. We let the truth speak where they can't interrupt it. She thought about that, then nodded. I understand. I gave her a small smile. I know you do. By late afternoon, the house began to fill again. Brittany returned first. I heard her keys before I saw her. The slight jingle, the careful pause at the door, like she was listening before stepping inside. When she entered the living room, she looked directly at me. Not casually, not politely, directly. Hi, she said. Hi. Her eyes moved briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward the hallway. The linen closet, still closed, still silent, but no longer unnoticed. How was your appointment? I asked. Fine, she said quickly. Everything's normal. Normal. That word felt almost ironic now. That's good, I replied. She lingered for a moment as if deciding whether to say more. Then she didn't. Instead, she walked toward the kitchen. Eric came home shortly after. This time, he didn't call out, didn't announce himself. He just entered quietly, his presence filling the space before his voice ever did. I watched him from the corner of my eye as he set his keys down. He looked different, not outwardly, but in the way he carried himself, more focused, more alert, like he had made a decision. "Mom," he said finally. "Eric." He stepped into the living room, standing across from me. Not sitting, not relaxing, standing. "We should talk," he said. I folded the newspaper carefully, setting it aside. "I agree." Brittany appeared in the doorway behind him, her arms crossed loosely over her stomach. Sophie lingered further back near the hallway, quiet but present. All of us in the same space. All of us aware. Eric took a breath. "I think things have gotten tense," he said. "That's one word for it." He ignored that. "We don't want conflict," he continued. "We want solutions." Solutions. I nodded slowly. "So do I." "Then let's find one," he said. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who thought this was still something he could control. "I already have," I said. That caught him off guard. His eyes narrowed slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means," I replied calmly, "we're not going to keep having the same conversation in circles." Brittany shifted behind him. "And what conversation would you prefer?" she asked. I met her gaze. The honest one. Silence. Eric's jaw tightened. "We've been honest." "No," I said softly. "You've been careful." That landed. I saw it. The flicker. The crack. Small, but real. Eric stepped closer. "What exactly are you accusing us of?" he asked. There it was. The challenge. The line drawn. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I stood, slowly, deliberately, and walked past them, down the hallway, toward the linen closet. I felt them watching me, every step, every movement. By the time I reached the door, the air behind me felt charged, heavy, waiting. I opened the closet, reached inside, and pulled the metal box out into the light. When I turned back around, everything had changed. Eric's face, Brittany's posture, Sophie's breath, all of it. Frozen. "What is that?" Brittany asked. Her voice was tight, controlled, but not calm. I walked back into the living room, holding the box in both hands. "You've been looking for this," I said. Eric's eyes locked onto it. Sharp. Intense. "I don't know what you're talking about." Of course he didn't. Not yet. I set the box down on the coffee table, right in the center, where no one could ignore it. "You moved me out of my room," I continued. "You sealed the floor. You rushed a nursery you didn't need yet." I looked at him, and you still didn't find it. Silence. Thick. Unavoidable. Brittany's fingers tightened around her arm. "You're making wild assumptions," she said quickly. "No," I replied. "I'm connecting facts." Eric stepped forward. "You went through my things," he demanded. I almost smiled. "Your things." The irony was almost too much. This was hidden in my floor, in my room. "In my house," I said, "long before you decided to rearrange everything." He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Not without revealing too much. I opened the box. Slowly, letting them see. The letter, the documents, the USB, everything. Eric's eyes flicked over it. Fast. Too fast. Like he recognized more than he wanted to admit. Brittany took a small step back. "What is all this?" she asked. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Eric.
"Why don't you tell her I said?"
He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. The silence stretched, then snapped.
"I don't know what you think you found,"
he said finally. But it doesn't change anything. That was the moment. The shift. The break. Because he didn't ask what it was. He didn't question it. He denied it, without even seeing it. I nodded slowly. "You're right," I said. That caught him off guard again. It does change everything. And now, there was no going back. For a moment, no one moved. The box sat open on the coffee table between us like something alive, breathing, waiting, daring anyone to touch it. Eric's eyes were fixed on it, but not with curiosity, with recognition, with calculation. Brittany hovered just behind him, her hand pressed against her stomach, her expression tight in a way I hadn't seen before. Not composed, not controlled, worried. Sophie stood off to the side near the hallway, her fingers gripping the edge of the wall again, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was watching. And she was ready. "You shouldn't be going through things you don't understand," Eric said finally. His voice lower now. There was something different in it. Less polished. More exposed. I tilted my head slightly. "Then help me understand," I said. He didn't answer. Of course he didn't. Because the moment he explained anything, he would have to admit something. Instead, he stepped closer to the table, reaching for the box. I moved faster than he expected, closing the lid with a firm, quiet click. His hand stopped midair. "Don't I said?" The word wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Something in my tone made him hesitate. "Just long enough." "What are you hiding?" Brittany asked, her voice sharper now. I looked at her. Really looked. At the woman who had smiled through every conversation, who had wrapped manipulation in politeness, who had turned my home into something unrecognizable. "I could ask you the same thing I said calmly." Her jaw tightened. "We've been completely transparent." "No," I said. "You've been careful." Eric exhaled sharply, stepping back. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You find some old paperwork and suddenly what? You think there's some conspiracy." I held his gaze. "You already knew it was there. That landed. Hard." He didn't react immediately, but I saw it. That flicker. That moment where denial and truth collided behind his eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Too quickly. Too clean. I nodded slowly. "Then you won't mind if we go through it together." Brittany's eyes widened slightly. Eric didn't respond. Because he knew. If we went through it line by line, word by word, there would be no space left to hide. I reached into the box and pulled out the envelope. Frank's handwriting. Steady, certain. I held it up just enough for Eric to see. "This is from your father," I said. His jaw clenched. "You had no right." "I had every right," I interrupted. He left it for me. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I opened the letter slowly. Not because I needed to read it again, but because they needed to hear it. "All of it?" Brittany asked cautiously. "Yes," I said. And then I began. "My Mattie." The room seemed to shrink as I read. Frank's words filled the space. Calm, clear, unforgiving in their honesty. I watched Eric as I read. Not the paper, not the words. Him. At first he stood still, expression controlled, eyes distant. But as I continued, as the words turned from explanation to truth, something changed. His shoulders tightened, his jaw locked, his breathing shifted. And when I reached the part about the money, the taking, the pattern, the entitlement, he looked away, just for a second, but it was enough. Sophie saw it too. I could feel her attention sharpen. I finished the letter without stopping, without softening it, without skipping a single line, because Frank hadn't softened it, and neither would I. When I lowered the paper, the silence that followed was different. Not empty, not uncertain, final. Brittany was the first to speak. This doesn't prove anything, she said quickly. It's just his opinion. I almost laughed. Opinion. That was one way to describe it. I reached into the box again, pulled out the first folder, and placed it on the table. Then let's move past opinions, I said. Eric didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even pretend to. I opened the folder, spread the papers out. Bank statements, highlighted transactions, dates, amounts, patterns that couldn't be explained away. Do you recognize these? I asked. He said nothing. Because I do. I continued. These are our accounts. The ones your father and I trusted you around. His hands curled slightly at his sides. That doesn't mean... It means exactly what it looks like. The words came out colder now, stronger, because there was no doubt left. Brittany stepped forward, scanning the pages. There could be another explanation, she said quickly. Maybe transfers or... Then let him explain them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Because now, it wasn't about emotion. It was about fact. Eric finally moved, stepping closer to the table, looking down at the papers. Not pretending anymore, but not confessing either. How long, I asked. He didn't answer. How long have you been taking from us? Silence. Eric. His name felt different now, not soft, not maternal. Just real. He let out a slow breath. This isn't what you think, he said. I nodded. You're right. That caught him again. It's worse. The words landed. Heavy. Irreversible. Brittany's eyes flicked between us. What are you saying? She demanded. I reached into the box one more time and pulled out the USB. This, I said quietly, is what removes any doubt. Eric's head snapped up, and for the first time, there was no control in his expression, no calculation, no mask. Just fear. You listened to it? He asked. The question came out too fast, too sharp. I held his gaze. Yes. Silence. Then, Eric, Brittany said, her voice shifting now. What is she talking about? He didn't answer her. He was still looking at me, still calculating, still searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. Not anymore, because now the truth wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried under floorboards. It wasn't locked in a box. It was here, in the open, between us. And whatever happened next wouldn't be quiet, wouldn't be careful, wouldn't be hidden, because the moment he asked about the recording, he had already given himself away. No one spoke for a long second. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said. Just not out loud. Brittany looked from me to Eric, confusion turning into something sharper, more urgent. What recording? She asked. Eric didn't answer. He was still staring at the USB in my hand, like it had just rewritten the rules of the room. Eric. She pressed her voice tightening. What is she talking about? He finally tore his gaze away from me and looked at her. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. That flicker of calculation again. The same one I had seen before. But now, it wasn't directed at me. It was directed at her. I don't know, he said. The lie came easily. Too easily. Brittany's eyes narrowed. You just asked if she listened to it. I said I didn't know what she was talking about, he snapped. That's not what you said. Their voices began to rise. Fracture! Crack! And I stood there watching. Because this was the moment where everything began to turn. Not because I forced it, but because the truth refused to stay contained. I set the USB down on the table. Carefully, deliberately. We can listen to it together, I said. That stopped them both. Silence dropped back into the room. Heavy. Controlled. Eric shook his head immediately. There's no need for that. Then explain it. I don't have to explain anything. The words came out sharper now. Defensive. Cornered. I stepped closer to the table. Yes, I said quietly. You do. Brittany looked at him again. This time not as a partner. As someone reassessing. You told me everything was under control, she said. I said it would be, he replied. That's not the same thing. Their voices were no longer coordinated, no longer aligned. The cracks were widening, and neither of them could stop it. I reached for my phone, connected the USB again, and before either of them could react, I pressed play. Frank's voice filled the room. Clear, steady, unavoidable. I need you to understand something, Eric. Eric moved instantly. Turn that off. I didn't. Turn it off, he said again, louder this time. Still, I let it play. Because this was the truth he couldn't interrupt. This isn't about paying it back. Brittany's face changed as she listened. The confusion disappeared, replaced by something else. Recognition. Slow. Unfolding. You said you were going to pay it back. She turned toward Eric. What is he talking about? Eric stepped forward again, his hand reaching for my phone. I pulled it back. Don't I said? This time my voice was not soft, not gentle, firm, final. He stopped, but barely. His entire body was tense now, like something inside him was about to snap. You don't get to play that, he said. I do, I replied. Not in my house. The words came out before he could stop them, and the moment they did, everything froze. My house. Not ours. Not shared. His. I tilted my head slightly. Your house, I repeated. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because the truth of what he had just said hung in the air, undeniable. Frank's voice continued in the background. You crossed a line. You've been taking money. You think I wouldn't notice? Each sentence landed harder than the last. Brittany stepped back slowly. Her hand dropped from her stomach. You told me this was just paperwork, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, accusing. You told me everything was legal. It is legal, Eric snapped. That doesn't sound legal. It doesn't sound like anything he shot back. It's just a conversation where you admit to taking money. Silence. There it was, the line he couldn't step back from. I paused the recording, Not because it was over, but because it had done its job. You can keep pretending, I said quietly, but you can't undo what's already been said. Eric turned toward me. His expression was no longer controlled, no longer careful. It was raw, angry, cornered. You went digging for something that doesn't concern you, he said. I almost laughed. It concerns me when it comes out of my accounts. You don't understand how things work, he snapped. No, I said calmly. I understand exactly how they work. I gestured toward the papers on the table. The transfers, the timing, the pattern, then toward the USB, and the confession. His jaw clenched. That wasn't a confession. It was enough. Brittany shook her head slowly, stepping further away from him now. You said we were just helping your mom, she said. We are helping her. By taking control of her house, by making sure it doesn't fall apart. It wasn't falling apart, it would have. Their voices rose again, no longer careful, no longer aligned. The alliance was breaking, right in front of me. Sophie moved slightly, coming closer to my side. Not hiding anymore, standing with me. Eric noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flicked to her, then back to me, and something changed again. A shift, a realization. You've been talking to her, he said. I didn't answer. You've been turning her against me. Sophie spoke before I could. I turned myself, she said. Her voice was steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. Eric stared at her, as if he didn't recognize the person standing in front of him. You don't understand what's going on, he said. I understand enough. No, you don't. I understand you were lying. Silence. Heavy. Irreversible. Eric looked between us. At me. At Sophie. At Brittany. And for the first time there was nowhere left for him to stand. No version of the story he could control. No narrative he could shape. Just truth. Raw. Exposed. And closing in. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said finally. The last defense. The weakest one. No, I said quietly. I'm seeing it clearly, and that was the moment. The point of no return. Because once something is seen clearly, it can't be unseen. No one rushed to fill the silence after that. It settled over us like something final, thick, unmoving, impossible to ignore. Eric stood in the center of the room, his chest rising and falling just a little too fast. Brittany had stepped back near the kitchen doorway, one hand braced against the wall, her expression no longer composed, no longer careful. Sophie stood beside me. Not behind me. Beside me. And I felt it. That quiet shift. The one Frank had written about. If she chooses honesty over convenience, she had. Now it was my turn. You should sit down, I said to Eric. He let out a short, bitter laugh. I'm fine. You're not, I replied calmly. And neither am I. So let's stop pretending. That word again. Pretending. It landed harder now because no one could deny it. Brittany spoke first. Eric, she said, her voice tight. You need to explain this. I don't need to explain anything, he snapped. You just heard it, she shot back. Your father. My father was paranoid, he interrupted sharply. The words hung in the air. Ugly. Irreversible. I felt something inside me go very still. Careful, I said quietly. He turned toward me. What he challenged. That's not a road you want to go down. His eyes flashed. You think I'm scared of this? he said, gesturing toward the box, the papers, the phone.
You think this changes anything?
I held his gaze.
Yes. One word.
No hesitation. Because it did. It changed everything. Brittany stepped forward again, her voice rising. You told me this was about helping your mother, she said. You said she needed structure support. She does.
Then why are there documents about selling the house?
He froze.
Just for a second.
But it was enough.
You said that was a backup plan.
She continued, her voice trembling now.
In case something happened.
It is a backup plan. You already have a buyer. Silence. I watched him closely. Because this was the moment the truth would either collapse or stand.
Who told you that? He asked.
His voice had dropped. Cold. Controlled again. Brittany blinked. I heard you, she said. On the phone. You said they were ready. He didn't deny it. Didn't confirm it. Just stared at her. And in that stare, everything was said. Her face changed. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Trust slipping. Understanding settling in. You were going to sell it, she said slowly. Eventually. Without her consent. We would have had consent. I let out a quiet breath. From forged signatures, I asked. His head snapped toward me. I didn't forge anything. I reached into the box again, pulled out one of the documents, held it up. Then explain this. His eyes flicked to it, then away. Too fast. Too familiar. You had a draft, I said, with my name already signed. That was just a template.
No,
I said softly.
That was practice.
Brittany took a step back. You said everything was legal, she repeated.
It is legal,
he insisted, though the certainty was starting to crack. We were going to do it the right way. When I asked, he didn't answer. After I signed, I continued. Or after you decided I didn't need to.
That's not fair.
No, I said. It's not. Silence again, but this time it felt different. Not like something building, like something collapsing, piece by piece, layer by layer. Sophie spoke again, her voice quieter now, but no less steady. You said Grandma wasn't safe to live alone, she said. Eric looked at her.
And you told me to say that too.
His expression hardened.
You don't understand what that means. I understand it wasn't true. You think this is simple, he snapped. You think this is about right and wrong.
Yes, she said. And that was it. The simplicity of it. The clarity. It hit harder than anything else. Because for all his explanations, all his justifications, he couldn't make it complicated enough to hide what it was. I stepped forward slightly. Your father saw this coming, I said. Eric let out a frustrated breath.
Stop bringing him into this. I will when you stop proving him right.
That landed.
Hard.
His shoulders tightened. His jaw clenched.
You think he knew everything he said? You think he was perfect? No.
I said. I think he was careful. And I'm not. I met his gaze.
No.
Silence. Then,
what do you want from me?
He demanded. The question came out louder than anything else he'd said. Frustration, anger, desperation. Finally breaking through. I didn't answer right away because the truth was, what I wanted wasn't something he could give me anymore. I wanted honesty, I said finally. I wanted respect. I wanted my son. My voice didn't break, but something inside me did, quietly, completely. He looked at me. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw it. Regret. But it didn't last, because control came back, as it always did.
"This isn't over,"
he said. No, I agreed. It's not, but not in the way he meant, because now, this wasn't a family argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't something we could smooth over with time and silence. It was something else entirely, something that had moved beyond this room, beyond this house, beyond what he could manage. Brittany spoke again, her voice quieter now. "What happens now?" I looked at her, at the woman who had stood beside him, who had helped, who had believed, or chosen to. "That depends," I said, on what I turned my gaze back to Eric, on whether he finally tells the truth. He didn't respond, didn't move, didn't speak, because he had run out of space to stand. And the truth, the real truth, was already here, waiting for whatever came next. No one slept that night. Not really. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. Every room held the echo of what had been said, what had been revealed, what could no longer be undone. I stayed on the sofa, the same place they had prepared for me, but it didn't feel like a place they controlled anymore. It felt like a place I had chosen, because I wasn't hiding. I wasn't being moved. I was waiting. Across the hall, Eric's bedroom door opened once, then closed again. I heard footsteps, then silence, then the faint murmur of voices. Brittany's. Tense. Controlled. Breaking. Sophie didn't leave her room, but once around midnight she opened her door just enough to look at me. I nodded. She nodded back. And closed it again. That was enough. By morning, something had changed. Not in the house, but in the air. The pretending was gone. No more soft smiles, no more careful tone, no more illusions of harmony, just truth, raw, uncomfortable, unavoidable. I was already awake when Eric walked into the living room. He looked different, tired, not physically, something deeper than that, like the weight of everything had finally settled. "Mom," he said. I looked up from the cup of coffee in my hands. Yes. He didn't sit, didn't relax, just stood there like he wasn't sure what position he was allowed to take anymore. "We need to figure this out," he said. I nodded slowly. "We do." There was a pause. "Then I didn't plan it the way it turned out," he said. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than anything he had offered so far. I didn't interrupt. "I needed money," he continued. "At first it was small. I was going to replace it. I had heard that before, on the recording, still hearing it now out loud. Here. It landed differently. Then it got bigger, he admitted. "Yes," I said quietly. "It did." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. "I thought I could fix it before you noticed," he said. "Before it mattered." I watched him. Carefully. Before I mattered, I asked. He stopped, his back to me, then slowly turned. "That's not what I meant, but it's what you did." Silence. He didn't deny it. Couldn't. Brittany stepped into the room then. Her face was pale, her posture different, less controlled, more uncertain. "I didn't know everything," she said. I looked at her. "I believe that," I said. She exhaled, her shoulders dropping slightly, but I knew enough, she added. There it was, her truth, not innocence. Not fully, but not blind either. You knew about the house, I said. She nodded. And the plan to sell it? Another nod. But not. All of this, she said, gesturing vaguely toward the table, toward the box, toward everything that had come out. Eric let out a short breath. It was supposed to be temporary, he said. Just until we got back on track. By taking control of everything I asked. By stabilizing things. I shook my head slowly. You didn't stabilize anything, I said. You built something on top of a lie. The words hung there. Heavy. Final. Brittany looked at him again. This isn't what you told me, she said. I told you what mattered. You told me what worked for you. That landed. Harder than anything I had said. Because it came from her. Because it wasn't about me anymore. It was about him. And the cracks were widening. Sophie stepped into the room quietly. No hesitation now. No fear. She stood beside me again, and I felt it. That quiet, steady presence. The one Frank had believed in. Eric noticed. Of course he did. His eyes flicked to her, then back to me. What happens now? He asked. The same question. But this time, there was no anger in it, just something else, something closer to uncertainty. I set my cup down carefully. Now I said we deal with what's real. He nodded once, slowly. And what does that mean? It means I said you don't get to make decisions about this house. He opened his mouth to respond, then stopped. Because he knew. He had no ground left to stand on. It means, I continued, you don't get access to my accounts. Another pause. Another silent acceptance. And it means, I finished, that what you did doesn't disappear just because you admit it. Brittany looked between us. What are you going to do? She asked. I held her gaze. The right thing. Eric let out a quiet breath. And what is that? I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, there wasn't just one answer. There were consequences. There were choices. There were lines that had already been crossed. And there were some things that couldn't be undone. I'm not throwing you away, I said finally. His head lifted slightly. Hope. Just a flicker. But I saw it. I'm not pretending this didn't happen either. That flicker faded, replaced by something more grounded, more real. You'll have to face what you did, I said. How he asked. I met his eyes. Legally. The word landed. Final. Unavoidable. Brittany inhaled sharply. Eric didn't move. Didn't speak. But something in him settled. Not relief. Not acceptance. Something closer to understanding. I thought I could control it, he said quietly. I know. I thought I could fix it. I know. I didn't think it would get this far. I nodded. Neither did I. Silence. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It wasn't suffocating. It was clear, like something had finally been stripped down to what it was. No illusions, no excuses, just truth. Sophie reached for my hand. I squeezed hers gently, and for the first time since I walked back into this house, I didn't feel like I was standing alone. Eric looked at us, then at the room, then at the house itself. I never meant to lose this, he said. I followed his gaze. To the walls, the space, the life we had built. You didn't lose it, I said. You gave it up. The words weren't cruel, they weren't angry, they were simply true. And sometimes, that was harder to hear than anything else. He nodded slowly. Like he understood that, like he couldn't argue with it anymore. And in that moment, something shifted. Not back to what it was, never that, but forward, into something honest. Even if it hurt, the nursery was the last thing to go. Not the paint that stayed for a while soft yellow, clinging to the walls like a memory that didn't know where it belonged. Not the curtains either, or the small cloud-shaped nightlight that still cast a warm glow in the evenings, but the crib. The crib was dismantled the very next day. Eric did it himself. He didn't ask for help, didn't speak while he worked, just knelt on the floor where he had once tightened those bolts, his movements slower now, more deliberate. I stood in the doorway for a while watching, not interfering, not commenting, just witnessing. Because this too mattered, not as punishment, but as truth. Each screw he loosened sounded louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet room. Sophie stood beside me, her arms folded loosely, her expression calm but attentive. Brittany stayed back. She watched from the hallway at first, then disappeared into the kitchen, returning only when the last piece had been lifted away. No one rushed him. No one told him what to do, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't acting out of control. He was responding to consequence. When the crib was finally moved, the floor beneath it was exposed again. The board, the same one Frank had tapped with his cane, the same one Eric had tried and failed to open. Now it sat there quiet and unhidden, nothing covering it, nothing pretending it wasn't there. Eric looked at it for a long moment, then he stood and stepped back. He didn't try to touch it again. That more than anything told me he understood. Not everything, but enough. "I'll repaint," he said quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet." He nodded once, accepting that. Sophie stepped forward, then walking into the room like it belonged to her again. She stood near the window looking out at the yard. "I like the light," she said softly. I smiled. "So do I." Brittany leaned against the door frame, her hand resting gently on her stomach. "I didn't think it would turn out like this," she said. I looked at her. "I know." She hesitated, then added, "I should have asked more questions." "Yes," I said. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, because there was nothing left to defend, only things to face. Later that week, the house began to shift again, but this time it wasn't forced. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't done behind anyone's back. We opened the boxes from the basement together. Not all at once. Not in a rush. Piece by piece, memory by memory. Frank's photographs returned to the nightstand. My clothes went back into the wardrobe. The small things found their way home again. Not everything stayed the same. It couldn't. Too much had been revealed. Too much had changed. But something new began to form in its place. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Sophie moved into the spare room for a while. Not permanently, but long enough to breathe, to think, to choose her own space again. We spent evenings together, sometimes reading, talking, sitting in the quiet without needing to fill it. She asked questions about Frank, about the house, about the way things used to be, and I answered. Honestly, because that was the only way forward. Eric left for a few days. Legal appointments, conversations, consequences unfolding in ways neither of us could avoid. When he came back, he was quieter, more grounded, not fixed, not redeemed, but changed. And that was a beginning. Brittany stayed, not because things were easy, but because leaving would have been easier. and she chose not to. That mattered. Even if it didn't erase anything, the nursery room didn't return to what it had been. Not completely. I didn't want it to. Instead, we created something different. A space that held more than one story. One corner remained open, simple, unclaimed. Not for a crib. Not yet. Just space. For whatever came next. For whoever chose to enter it with honesty. I placed a chair near the window, a small bookshelf beside it. Sophie added a blanket. Brittany left a small basket with baby things, not as a claim, but as a possibility. And the floor. The board remained exactly where it was, not hidden, not sealed, not forgotten. Because some truths weren't meant to be buried. They were meant to be remembered. I stood in that room one evening, the light fading softly through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. Sophie sat in the chair, a book open in her lap. She looked up at me. "Do you think things will ever go back to normal?" she asked. I considered that, then shook my head. "No." She frowned slightly. "Is that bad?" I smiled gently. "No," I said. "It just means we have to build something better." She thought about that, then nodded. "I think we can." I believed her. Not because everything was fixed, not because the pain was gone, but because truth had finally found its place in this house. And once truth has a place, it changes everything. I walked over to the window, standing beside her. Outside, the world moved as it always did, cars passing, leaves shifting, light fading into evening. Inside, we were still here, still standing, still choosing, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. There are moments in life when the people we trust the most become the ones who test us the hardest. Not always out of cruelty, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of weakness, and sometimes out of something we don't recognize until it's too late. But here's what I've learned. Love does not mean surrendering your voice. Family does not mean giving up your place. And growing older does not mean becoming invisible. We all deserve to be heard, to be respected, to be included in the decisions that shape our lives. And when that respect is taken from us, we have the right to take it back. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with clarity, with boundaries, with truth. Because truth has a way of finding light even when it's buried beneath the floorboards of our own lives. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt overlooked or pushed aside by the people closest to you? Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters more than you think. And if you believe stories like this help people feel seen and understood, don't forget to like and subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone.